Olding, and I, we're pleased to welcome you to tonight's Remarkable Journeys that are featuring Geoffrey Hansen. And Katie will have a few words before we begin tonight's event. Katie?
Thank you, Stephna, and good evening, everyone. My name is Katie Olding, and after tonight's presentation, we'll be opening up for a Q&A with Geoffrey Hansen. So we ask that you type in your questions using the button at the bottom of your screen that says Q&A. You can enter your questions anytime during his presentation, and I'll save them till the end. And so with that, I'm going to pass it back to Stephna.
Great. Thanks, Katie.
Sure.
I've been really looking forward to this presentation, and I know Geoffrey's done a lot of work, and I really appreciate it. After being sequestered in my home for a number of months now, I can tell you that I too find myself increasingly anxious for a travel adventure. So 2 weeks in a car in Iceland sounds pretty darn good to me. In late September 2019, photographer Geoffrey Hansen and his wife Kathy, they traveled to Iceland in what would turn out to be an unforgettable experience. Come along with them and enjoy their images of otherworldly landscapes, thundering waterfalls, massive glaciers, and thanks to incredibly good fortune, the aurora. And it's my pleasure to introduce Geoffrey Hansen. All right, Geoffrey.
Okay, are we there?
Yes.
All right, good enough. Let me start right here. Reykjavik is the capital of Iceland. That is where you will fly into. It's a most interesting modern city. One of the biggest landmarks in town is the Sunseeker, which is a statue along the harbor front. This image was created the evening we arrived in Reykjavik. It's a very popular gathering spot, and this image gives you an idea of some of the weather and clouds that frequent the area. It's a beautiful, beautiful part of town. The next day we decided to take a walk. We had a free day, and we discovered an incredible amount of street art. It's painted on industrial buildings, such as this. It's incredibly detailed, as you can see. This is painted on in the warehouse district near the harbor. This next one is downtown on the side of just a blank wall of a building next to an alley. And you can look and look and look for these things. You can spend days enjoying the street art. This one I found pretty interesting. Tells you how to tie a tie. Because there was a time in my life where I wore a tie every day. The variety of the art goes from the sublime to the ridiculous. And we even have buildings which are, under construction, as this one appears to be. It looks like it's a rebuild on a space. Beautifully detailed paintings. And then we have some sculpture. This is called the Unnamed Bureaucrat. Pretty interesting sculpture and a pretty interesting story behind it. It was somebody's idea of taking a poke at the bureaucracy. I'm sure no one here would feel like doing that, but it does convey a certain sense of community. Here's another mural on a building that was left. It was out of service. It was in an area that was being torn down. They're building a new building behind it. But again, just a horribly detailed or incredibly detailed piece of artwork. This is a shop downtown. Look at what they've done to this corner shop. It's just spectacular. This is the Harpa Concert Hall. It's really a world famous conference hall in Reykjavik. A beautiful glass structure. And if you go inside, it looks like this. And they have a lot of concerts. They have tourist services there. It's just a very, very beautiful building and unlike anything we had ever seen before. It lights up at night. Spectacular thing to see in the evening. Most folks start their trip by heading up in the Golden Circle. And one of the first things you'll find is Gullfoss. It's about an hour's drive from Reykjavik. This is a two-tiered waterfall, as you can see from the image. The first drop is 32 meters. The next drop is 70 meters into a narrow canyon, and the river goes off to the right. The day we were there, the wind was blowing probably 60 miles an hour. It was wet, but it was just incredibly interesting and beautiful. Spectacular waterfalls and just one of many. This is Brewerfoss. It's a waterfall and has by far the bluest water of all the waterfalls you're going to find in the Golden Circle. It's a difficult spot to reach. Some say it's a secret spot. It's a 4.5-mile hike each way through areas where at times you can't find a trail. And sometimes you're wading in mud up to your ankles, but completely worth it when you get there. We didn't get there. We stopped about 3/4 of a mile short because it was getting dark and we knew we'd have to find our way out. So this is the falls immediately down from the Brewerfoss fall itself, which is not much larger than this one, but it comes in from 4 or 5 different angles. So it's beautiful. But the important thing here is the color of this water coming off the glacier. This particular image here is a time exposure to add some motion to the water, and it gives you a sense of the blue, and that is not an enhanced color. After leaving this area, we drove to our guest house for the night, and as we were having dinner, it became dark, and somebody looked outside and said, "There's something going on in the sky out there." Well, of course, we'd hoped that we would see the northern lights. So dinner was over in a hurry, grabbed the camera gear, went outside, and found this. This was this building in the bottom of the image is, it's a house. It's probably, I don't know, 500 yards from where we were staying. And the show just kept going on and on and on. The Northern Lights are a real treat. We got there just at the beginning of the aurora season, and we were, as we said in the flyer for this event, just incredibly lucky. The building on the in the lower right corner of this image is the hotel we were staying in. The guest house is an old, probably 100-year-old house, and then they built this modern little set of rooms for the folks who come through. This is a view looking south from the guest house. More northern lights. The show just went on and on and on. I couldn't stop watching it and photographing it. The glow in the lower right is a geothermal plant. More northern lights, as you can see. And then this one was toward the end of the show that evening, and we virtually had every color of the rainbow in the aurora. Just absolutely spectacular. Never seen anything like it. And it absolutely unforgettable. Iceland has its own breed of horses, and you'll see images of these horses later in the presentation. This was really the first time that we encountered them. They're pretty small by comparison to the horses we have here, and they're very curious. Whenever I stop to try and take a photograph of these horses, it seemed like they'd always want to come over and find out what I was doing. And this guy was no exception. Beautiful, beautiful animals. Driving along the countryside, after we left the Golden Circle, we found a number of these churches. Now, Iceland, I think they're primarily Methodist churches, if I'm correct. And they have dozens and dozens of them because until the ring road was built, people couldn't travel very far in Iceland, so they had to have a church nearby. And the story we heard was that the church would actually pay the farmer for his land if they would let him buy or let him build a church on his property. And I don't know if that story is correct or not, or true or not, but most of the churches seem to be adjacent to a farm. And they come in all shapes and sizes. Most of them are small, and many of them are traditionally shaped, such as this one. Continuing around the island, we next approach the south coast. And this is one of the most visited and more spectacular sections of Iceland, as you will see here in a couple of minutes. One of the first waterfalls you encounter is Seljalandsfoss. This is a fall of over 40 meters over the cliff face. And I don't know if you can see it in the photo, but there is a trail behind the waterfall where visitors can walk behind the waterfall from one side, come out the other, and the trail it's a good trail. It's kind of wet, and if you go back there, you're going to get soaked. But what a spectacular opportunity to walk behind a beautiful waterfall like that. This is another shot of the water coming over the falls. This one is in black and white, and it just gives a sense of the volume of the water that you're seeing come over these falls. About 500 yards away from Seljalandsfoss is another waterfall known as the Hidden Waterfall. And it actually falls into an enclosed canyon, and you can see the waterfall through the gap here in the rocks. And it's possible to walk back through the gap on a trail, which is wet and slippery, but well worth it for the adventurous traveler because you can get right up next to this hidden waterfall back in the canyon. I'm sure many of you have seen photographs of Skogafoss. It is one of the largest waterfalls in Iceland. It has a drop of 62 meters and a width of 25 meters. Again, you can walk right up to this waterfall. If you do, you're going to get wet. The day we were there, we were lucky enough to catch a rainbow above the waterfall. Absolutely spectacular, and you can just see how it dwarfs the visitors that are close to the action. This is another image just conveying the volume of water that comes over these falls. Absolutely staggering. I've never seen anything like it here in the States. This is a canyon which is located further along the ring road. I have tried and tried and tried to pronounce it. I can't, and I'm not going to embarrass myself or irritate Icelanders by trying, which is why I posted the name for you. Absolutely spectacular place. The canyon's been hollowed out over millions of years by the Fiora River. Unfortunately, this area was practically ruined by fans of Justin Bieber a few years ago when it showed up in one of his videos. They had to close the access for a couple of years to restore it. They built viewing platforms, they restricted access, and I believe it just opened up in the middle of 2019 again for visitors. And you are not able to just wander in and walk along the creek, but this view is from one of the viewing platforms at the shortly after the water drops into the canyon. And you can see it's just a spectacular, beautiful setting. This is a view of the waterfall entering the canyon. And then this next view is at the bottom of the canyon where it meets a road. And this is looking up along the river through the basalt columns that line the river. The evening after our first night along the south coast, we stayed at a guest house that had this pond behind their building and enjoyed one of the nicest sunsets we saw on the entire trip. Beautiful evening. Unfortunately, that night, the northern lights did not come out, even though we were more than ready. But we did see them again, and so will you. Our next stop was in Scatafell National Park, which includes the glacier you can see in the middle of the image. I believe it's pronounced the Skafta Fellsjökull Glacier. This is a little bit closer view with some of the local residents enjoying the water. And then another shot right at the edge of the pond, giving you an idea of the size of the glacier. It actually proceeds off in an S curve through those islands of rock that you can see there. This night, we were staying at a guest house in Hofen, and the northern lights came out again. And this was by far the most spectacular presentation of the lights that we saw on the trip. To give a sense of scale, those lights along the bottom are a little village that was about 1.5 miles from where I was taking these images. As time progressed, the display just got bigger and better. And this image probably was the most spectacular display we saw on the trip. Again, that little village is down at the bottom. I was using a wide angle lens and I could not capture it all. And at times, you just stop and watch it. You don't even take photographs. It's just too awe-inspiring, and that's something that should be on everyone's bucket list. The next morning, we went a little further to there's a national park which has a number of waterfalls and some great hikes. This is the Svartafoss waterfall, also translated as the Black Falls. It flows over a drop of about 20 meters And its name comes from the black basalt columns that surround the little canyon where the waterfall drops into the stream. This is another view of the same stream. It was about a 3.5-mile hike uphill to get there, but worth every step. Further down the road, you come to the Glacier Lagoon, which we'll see in a moment or two. There's also a beach called Diamond Beach, where pieces of ice that have calved off the glacier and broken, gone out into the ocean, and then bounced around, get washed back up onto the shore. The day we were there, where there was not a lot of this ice on the shore, but what was pretty spectacular, because you can see it contrasting with the black sand that it comes to rest on. I think this piece was probably about 3.5, 4 feet in length. I've seen photos where there were pieces of ice up there that were 20 or 30 feet. That was not the case when we were there, but nonetheless, it's pretty darn spectacular to see these big chunks of ice sitting on the beach. The Glacial Lagoon is seen here. It's the Jólakssárlón, pardon me, Glacier Lagoon. It borders the Vatnajökull National Park in southeastern Iceland. And even when we were there in September, which is kind of the end of the summer season, the waters were dotted with icebergs. And those were from the surrounding glacier. As I mentioned earlier, the water from this lagoon flows under a bridge and out into the ocean, just a very short distance away. Some of the icebergs to me look maybe a little too large to go into the bridge, but I'm not sure how they deal with that, nor did I ask. This is another view of the glaciers in the Glacier Lagoon. And this is one of the most popular glacier viewing areas in this part of Iceland. There were many folks out in boats looking at the glaciers and taking photographs of them, of the icebergs, I should say. But we were lucky enough to find another location which required a little more driving and a little more walking. It was a glacial lagoon about 3 or 4 kilometers up the road. And we were able to find these glaciers across a small lagoon after you take a short hike. This is a close-up of the same image in the last photo, trying to demonstrate the translucence of the ice and the beautiful blue color that it takes on. And here's another image showing the general configuration of the ice, which is right on the edge of the lagoon, next to the hill behind it. While we were there, a chunk of ice actually calved off onto these glaciers, and with a big crack and a splash, and it was a neat thing to see. This feature is pretty interesting. It's Kirkjugolf, it's called. It is a basalt formation. You'll see a lot of these vertically oriented basalt columns throughout Iceland, and this particular group of them have been polished by glaciers. And it, many people thought it resembled a church floor, hence the name. And it's a pretty interesting place to visit. Nothing like that, again, I've ever seen anywhere around here. It's a relatively small area, not an acre, but very interesting. And we were in the area the last part of September into the first week or so of October. And here and there, we were lucky enough to find some fall color. And this was some of the nicer fall color we encountered. As you might imagine, Iceland is full of rivers. And this is a river whose name I do not recall. You can see the milky white water, which indicates that it's a glacial river. And interestingly, the ring road has to cross all of these rivers. Most of the bridges are one-lane bridges. And on the smaller bridges, there's actually just a convention that's developed that as you're approaching the bridge, if you see somebody on or starting to enter the bridge, there's a pull out and you take the pull out. And you let them pass and then it's your turn. And this happens on many, many small bridges. There are some long bridges. Some bridges may be half a mile long. Those will have signals on the end of the bridge, red lights, green lights, and pardon me, along the span of the bridge, there'll actually be pullouts where if somebody pulls out when they shouldn't, they have a way to get out of the path of the oncoming vehicle. We continued along the highway. We passed this area that is relatively famous for the moss that grows on an old lava field. Now, there's a lot of moss in Iceland, but these moss blankets, which are on the Eldron lava field, are absolutely remarkable. That moss is maybe a foot thick. You can walk on it. You know, we didn't really think we ought to, but again, it was super interesting, and I've never seen anything like it. This here's another shot of the same moss. It looks like just a velvet landscape, and it's you just want to touch it because it's so cool and so unlike anything you've ever seen. More waterfalls. This is Hengifoss. It is the third highest waterfall in the country. It's 118 meters. Like many of these waterfalls, it's a long hike uphill. It's going to take probably 3 kilometers. Going downhill is great because you're going downhill. But going uphill, it's kind of a struggle here and there. This waterfall is just really interesting for the bands of different colored basalt that surround it. You can see those in the image. And just downstream from Hengifoss is Litlanefoss, which is another it's a smaller waterfall. It's on the same trail. And the remarkable thing about this waterfall is the columnar basalt that shrouds the waterfall. It's similar to Svartafoss in that regard, but there's more of it, and it's just a little more spectacular here, I think. Next, we found our way into East Iceland. It's about, I think, an 800-kilometer drive around the island, if memory serves me correctly. This 5-tiered waterfall, actually 6 tiers, was one that we just found along the road and stopped to take a photo of it. There's just no end to these spectacular waterfalls. You can spend all day looking at them. And we did at times. But this is a really interesting installation. This is in a little town on the eastern coast. And my fractured pronunciation is REYKJAVIK. Apologies to Icelanders because I think it's probably wrong. It's known as the Eggs of Mary's Bay. There are 34 granite eggs representing various local bird species. They were created by a local artist, and each one sits on its own pedestal adjacent to the harbor. And this image shows the craftsmanship that goes into producing these eggs. Look how highly polished it is. It reflects all of the surroundings. It's just the most interesting piece of art. And it's kind of out in the middle of nowhere. Really beautiful. Our journeys next took us toward North Iceland. And there's some spectacular scenery up there as well. The first waterfall we visited in that area is Godafoss. The drop is not very much. It's only about 12 meters. But the waterfall almost forms an amphitheater with these 3 different sections of falls. Spectacular view again. And this is another image of the same waterfall taken from a different location. A little bit longer exposure. Let the flowing water sort of silken out a little bit. In the area where we were at this point, there's a lake, Lake Mývatn. And according to what I understand, the lake has 1 island. And the island has 1 tree. And it's known as the Lone Tree. And this image was captured right at sunset along what I believe is the eastern edge of the lake. About 3 hours later, in the same spot, the aurora came out again. Not as much of a spectacular show as we'd seen before, but I think you have to count yourself pretty lucky just to see it at all. And we had 3 different episodes on this trip. One interesting thing we found in this area along Lake Mývatn was, as in most of Iceland, a number of sheep. But these sheep were actually hanging out in a nature preserve. They're obviously owned by someone and they're herded. You can see the tag on his horn. Beautiful, interesting animals, and they are everywhere. We had to stop the car numerous times because of sheep in the road. And apparently the Icelanders eat a lot of their meat and they use a lot of their wool. You can find sweaters, of course, everywhere. Now, this nature walk that we took, it's in a relatively small nature preserve, but the fall colors are just spectacular. Really beautiful area. Very peaceful. There are very few forests in Iceland, so this particular area, which is called Hofða, is very popular with the locals because it's one of the few places you can actually come to and walk around in the woods. We stayed that night along Lake Mývatn. Had one of the best pizzas we've ever had. It was a smoked trout pizza. Don't discount that. If you ever get a chance to try a smoked trout pizza in Iceland, go for it. It was incredible. We set out the next morning. We had a long drive ahead of us this day, and most of it was along the coast. And this is just one of the views along the coast and the northern reaches. All these many beautiful little dwellings like this that are just out on a farm. They may raise hay, they may raise sheep, they may fish. A lot of people obviously make their living off the land. And it's kind of like being in Montana in that regard, because it's a lot of places there's just nothing in between the occasional farmhouse. It's just spectacular scenery. Now, along the way, we saw this lighthouse. It's the Sodnesfjall Lighthouse, and it's in Northern Iceland, pardon me. And if you look out toward where the water changes color, maybe a kilometer beyond that is the Arctic Circle. This was the same trip along the coast. Another spectacular farm sitting back up in this valley along this river. Spectacular clouds that day. I guess I'm using the word spectacular way too much, but sometimes that's the best word for what you see when you're there. And we found more horses. And we were drawn to this group of horses because, according to the information we were able to gather, it's the only remaining herd that are genetically pure from the original Icelandic breed of horses. There are much more than this small group in that herd, but they're guarded very carefully. Much as a thoroughbred horse would be in this country. Now, we understand from talking to some folks that people who show horses, and they do show these horses, if they take them off the island, they can't bring it back. And as a result, most of the folks who are in the horse showing business will take second or third tier Icelandic horses to a show in Europe or the British Isles, because once the horse leaves, it ain't coming back, and that is to preserve the genetic purity, I guess is what you call it. The next night, we stayed in a really nice hotel, which was a converted boarding school. And it, again, was kind of out in the middle of nowhere, a little town called Lagerbäki, maybe a block long. And interestingly, you can see there's a bay in the left-hand center of this image. Interestingly, the hotel is right next to a river, which turns out to be one of the most famous salmon fishing rivers in the world. And I spoke with the owner of the hotel about it for a while, because I like to do a little fishing now and then. And to say this river is exclusive is probably not enough. I mean, he told me people who fish there are British royalty, for example. It's apparently one of the most famous and remarkable salmon streams in the world. Unfortunately, the weather did not grant me an opportunity for a photograph of it, but we were treated to this sunrise the morning we stayed at the hotel. This is the Kollagleifarfoss. It's in a gorge, probably 10, 12 miles from the hotel we stayed in that night. Iceland is rich in folklore, and this area is named for a mythical goddess whose name was Kolla. And according to legend, she lived in the canyon, and the canyon actually became shaped by her daily activities, such as where she slept and where she cooked the salmon that she caught in the water. Again, this is another example of just the amazing array of waterfalls that you find in this country. And no two are the same. The next day, we ventured into West Iceland. Specifically, we were on our way to the Snæfellsnes Peninsula, Snæfellsnes. And one of the iconic spots in that peninsula is this black church. It's in a small village, and the only things there are a hotel and the church. I'm sure that any of you who have given any thought to a trip to Iceland or done any research have seen images of this church. It's iconic. And this is another view, this one in black and white, of the same church. I had to wait a few moments for folks to move away from it, but it's just a striking example of the architecture. That night, we stayed in Arnarstapi. It's another small community that has a couple of restaurants, a hotel. A few people live there, and they have this huge statue of Bardur, who was a mythical troll who lived in the area. It's one of Iceland's most renowned sculptures. And it is, I should have taken an image of someone standing next to it. It's about 30 feet tall, completely built of stone. It's something, again, just really unusual that you see this stuff there that just blows your mind. How they did it or why they did it. Along the coast, there are dozens of these little fishing villages. Obviously, that's a major industry in the area. And quite honestly, the reason I captured this image in this particular village was because of those spectacular clouds in the background. This was taken from a little harbor. I think it was a Sunday. I don't think they were out fishing that day. But anywhere you stop in Iceland and it's on the coast, you're going to find these fishing boats. On the same day's drive, we encountered these lenticular clouds forming over this little bump of an island or a mountain or hill at the end of that peninsula. Never seen a cloud formation like that, even over Mount Shasta, which has a reputation for forming great lenticular clouds. Up in these higher latitudes, there's some pretty incredible weather. And if you look on the lower left of the image, that's a surfer. And I got to hand it to that guy. That water was cold, and he and a buddy of his were out trying to catch a few waves. And we saw surfers in 2 or 3 spots, but this was just too spectacular to pass up. There I go with that word again. Okay, this is Mount Kirkjufell, one of the iconic images of Iceland. I'm sure you've seen it in the Game of Thrones, or it's been used in other movies. The name literally means church mountain in translation. It's considered to resemble a church by some, at least whoever named it. And the mountain next to it is called Stuthen, or Stuthen rather, pardon me. It's said to resemble a congregational hall. I'm not sure that's in the image, but this mountain, which you'll see in the next photo, is pretty interesting. Now, this is probably one of the most iconic images that's ever taken in Iceland. The triple waterfall with Kirkjufell in the background. It was very difficult to take an image here without a bunch of people in it. I had to patiently wait for a while. And when we first arrived, there were actually some people getting married on the bridge up in the left-hand corner of the picture above the waterfall. And there was no parking because the wedding party had pretty much taken the whole place up. So we drove around and hung out for a while and came back, and it had cleared out. But this is just one of those places that if you're there, you have to see it, even though I'm sure that the locals figure it's pretty much just a tourist destination. It's still pretty beautiful and not something you're going to see anywhere else. Our drive continued, and it's another image of a river with an abandoned building in the background. It, again, just shows the remoteness of this place, unless you get away from the big cities. And there are also some sheep, as you can see in the image. And there were sheep. A lot of them look like free-range animals all over the place. And we actually learned in one area that all of the ranchers just let their sheep run. And then when it's time to bring them in for either shearing or something worse for the sheep, everybody goes out on the roundup and they bring them to a large central corral, all the sheep. And then they segregate them by their ear tags into chutes that encircle the corral, and that's how the sheep get returned to their rightful owner. But apparently the roundup of the sheep is a big community event and everybody pitches in. It's kind of cool. This is another one of the many, many streams, and some nice weather forming over the hills that day. Most of the days we were in Iceland, we had absolutely crystal clear weather. We did not expect that. We took probably more winter clothes than we ever had a need for, but we were ready. Did not use them much. Even that day was probably about 60. And this is another group of the horses just out enjoying a pasture. Now we returned to Reykjavik. We were going to spend another, I think, 4 days there before our flight out, because our plan was to take our I think it was 9 or 10 days drive around the island and then return to Reykjavik. We still had the car, and use it as a base to go out and see other places. And we did that quite a bit. And some of those images have been interspersed with the ones I've shown you already in order to have at least the best representation I could give of a trip around the island, even though some of the images of the same place might have been taken a week apart. Now the Reykjanes Peninsula is southeast of Reykjavik, I believe. It encompasses or contains other things like the airport and the Blue Lagoon, which we passed on. You may have heard about the Blue Lagoon. It's a very expensive tourist trap to sit in a hot tub with maybe 1,000 of your best friends. We found this lighthouse on the outer reaches of this peninsula. It's called the Faro de Godur Lighthouse. There were many, many really cool little lighthouses perched around the island for obvious reasons. And in the same complex is the newer lighthouse, together with the administration building. And I'm not really sure why that boat is up on dry land, but it's some sort of an exhibit. It was interesting to see the contrast between the old and the new lighthouses. We continued around the island and we're drawn to a place called the Brimcatil Lava Rock, or lava pool rather. We found some surf. There had been a storm out in the Atlantic, and this area, actually the name Brimcatil translates to whitewater cauldron. I have no idea why they would name it that, but this could be a clue, I suppose. We probably stayed there an hour and a half, watching it, taking photographs of these unbelievable waves. And not too many people walked out on the viewing platform. This guy did. My hat's off to him. He got pretty wet, but he did it on purpose. And I think he had a GoPro with him. So we were going to hook up and look at each other's photos, but that never came to pass. But I suspect that he might have gotten a couple of really interesting shots just before the water hit him. We continued around the peninsula and came upon this beautiful little stone church. Again, a name I will not even attempt to pronounce. It's in the town of Valnes, and it was built in the years 1980 or 1886 and 87. As you can see, it's built of stone, and it's been just beautifully, beautifully maintained. This is another view of the same church. Couldn't stop taking pictures of this. It was just too pretty. And we came back to Reykjavik. We had a couple of days left. I think maybe 2 days left at this point. We did some more sightseeing. And then the evening before we left, we decided to go out and walk around, take some photographs, and see what we might have missed earlier. This is one of the main streets in downtown Iceland. As you can see, it's been painted in the colors of the rainbow, and that was done originally to celebrate Reykjavik Pride. I think it's a permanent installation now. If you walk to the end of that street, you find the Hallgrímskirkja Church. It's probably the main landmark in Reykjavik. You can see the tower from almost anywhere in town. Beautiful building. It was designed in 1937, eventually built beginning in 1945, and they finished it 40 years later. The design was inspired by the basalt columns, which we've seen around waterfalls and different images. The inside of the church is absolutely beautiful. They got a huge pipe organ, and one day we were there. An organist was playing, and the acoustics were out of this world. Just another beautiful, unusual structure, just not something you're going to see that often, or anywhere else, really. We're coming to the end of our trip, our evening walk out. We were some of the very few people downtown. I guess it was rainy, so people weren't out walking, but here's another example of just all the art in downtown Reykjavik. Everything is everyone is committed to the arts, which is important to me and many of you, I know, and we just enjoyed seeing it all. And here we are back where we started, at the Sun Voyager. This was taken the morning of our departure, right before we turned in our rental car and got on an airplane. sadly, to come home. This concludes our journey. I hope you enjoyed the images, and I hope this program piques your interest in Iceland. It's a wonderful place to visit. Uh, it's not difficult to get around. I mean, it can be as hard as you want to make it. If you want to hike, 100 miles, you can. If you want to take it easy and just ride in a bus, you can do that too. It is not as expensive as you might have heard. You can actually eat quite reasonably if you just stay away from the high-end restaurants and find seafood shacks, and the seafood's incredible. I'm happy to answer questions if some have been posted.
Yes, we do have some questions. So I'll read them off for you, Geoffrey, and we'll go one by one. So the first one is, what time of year did you visit and when would you recommend going? Summer versus autumn or winter?
Well, we were there the last week of September and a little longer than the first week of October. For us, that was the perfect time because there were 12 hours of daylight and 12 hours of night. And one of the main reasons I wanted to go was to see and photograph the Northern Lights, and we were very successful with that. The temperature or the climate was perfect when we were there. There were a couple of cold days and a couple of rainy days, but for the most part, it was just absolutely beautiful weather. Our daughter went, I think, in June, or the year before, maybe, and she had pretty much 24 hours of daylight, which allows you to go to places like Kirkjufell at 2 at night when there's no one there. One thing we were not able to do when we were there was go visit the ice caves, because they aren't considered safe to enter until late November or sometime in November. They're unstable in the warm weather. That was something I really missed because I really wanted to get inside and photograph one of those. We probably would have, if we'd gone in the winter, we would have been in ice caves. We would have seen more icebergs, probably more ice on the Diamond Beach. But a lot of the things we wanted to do, the hikes we wanted to take, probably would have been made impossible by bad weather. So I don't know, for us, fall was the best time. I'm sure other people have different thoughts.
Okay, so the next one, we still have comments coming in, which is great. Did you go with a group?
No. No, we don't vacation with groups. We planned it ourselves. As I said, our daughter had been there. She was a good source of information. We did engage a tour company. They arranged the lodging for us and the rental car. We had a Range Rover, which allowed us to travel on some of the secondary roads. But we were completely on our own. We stayed in guest houses, and many times they'd have a communal dinner there, but we did not go with a group.
Okay, and would you ever go back to Iceland?
In a minute.
Is it worth more than one trip? Is there enough to see?
Oh yes, I've got a list of things I want to go back for. We didn't have a chance to go into the Highlands, which, spectacular scenery. There I go again with that word. But you probably do need to go with someone when you go up there, because you're going to be needing to have a four-wheel drive vehicle that can ford streams, and you're going to have to know your way around. I wouldn't recommend just heading out there in your rental car. You might not make it back. But again, that's more remote than a lot of places. We missed a number of things simply because we had 10 days to drive 800 kilometers around the island, and you squeeze in everything you can, but I could spend another 3-4 weeks there, probably spend an overnight or two in Reykjavik just to start and end the trip, but no, you could spend a lot of time there. I haven't even shown you 10% of my photos.
Oh my gosh. Okay, the next one says, "Hi Jeff, it's Susan Siegel.
Hi, Susan.
Your photos are stunningly amazing. It seems that it was easy to get around Iceland. How did you decide what towns you wanted to visit?"
To some extent, that was dictated by the people who arranged our tour, because they made the reservations for us at the guest houses. Now, we could have done that through Airbnb, I'm sure. But working with these people really helped us. They gave us an incredibly detailed map, which unfortunately, because this is a Zoom presentation, I can't show you. Had we been in the library, I was going to have the map on the wall so everybody could see and enjoy it. At the end of the trip, they arranged for an extra day for our rental car because we decided we wanted to take one more day and go out and see stuff. And not only did they do that, but it didn't cost me an extra dime. You could do it all on your own. I know you could rent the car quite easily. We didn't go through Hertz. It was a small local rental company. The car was great. You could totally set up your own trip. We've done that in Europe with no problems at all. But for this trip to a place as completely foreign to us, we thought at least if we had someone help us pick where we'd stay, then that would basically tell us which towns we were going to have a chance to hang out in. And one thing I did regret, there were a couple of long days where we would drive through a really interesting little village and didn't have time to stop because we had to be somewhere or not get dinner. So that's how our itinerary was chosen.
Okay, so we got so far 6 questions, but this one's a comment which I very much agree with from Lee Trucker. Says, "Wonderful photographs, thank you."
Thank you.
And the next one is, "Were there many travelers? Is English spoken?"
Oh, English is spoken everywhere. There were not that many travelers at the time we went. Most of them are there in the summer. We were in a little shop in REYKJAVIK before we left town, and the shop owner, it was a little art gallery, in fact. It was a cooperative art gallery, much like the one we have here in Napa. And the proprietor was telling us to be very, very careful driving around the island because many of the people who come there and rent cars have never driven before. They learn how to drive on a computer, and she told us how dangerous it was. I never saw that to be a problem. Never really saw much in the way of crowds. I think if we had gone at a different time, we might have seen more crowds, a different time of year. Now, we have heard, and I don't know what the coronavirus has done to that, but we have heard that there was soon to be a direct flight between Beijing and REYKJAVIK. The island has apparently become very popular with tourists from China. We saw a lot of those folks. And if they started flying big aircraft from there, it could probably get a little more crowded. I would say right now would be a perfect time to go if you could get there. But we didn't have a problem with crowds.
And I think you might have answered this already, but I'm going to skip to one because I think it's on the same topic. Was the language an issue?
Only in reading the signs. Everybody spoke English. Well, no, they don't. I take that back. Out in the middle of the northern part of Iceland, we had stopped for gas, and a couple of guys were in a truck, and they were all decked out in fly fishing gear. Well, that's one of my big hobbies. So I wanted to go and talk to them about where you can go fly fishing. They didn't speak English, and that conversation didn't go anywhere. They were the only people I encountered on the whole trip who didn't at least have enough English to help me, buy gas or buy something in a grocery store. And anywhere we stayed, English was the language that was used.
Would you say that local people were friendly?
Extremely. Extremely.
That was another question. And let's see, biggest challenge for you photographically?
The biggest challenge was probably the aurora, because it was so exciting. It was hard to figure out what and when to shoot. Luckily, the 2 nights that it was the biggest, I was able to figure it out, but I would have preferred to have maybe found a location where I had a lake or a recognizable mountain to include in the image. And you never knew when it was going to happen. It could have happened any night. The second, third night we were there we were probably 75 kilometers out of Reykjavik, and people in Reykjavik were telling us that was the biggest display they'd seen all year. You just never know, and you can't guess, and you have to be wherever you are and take advantage of it. It's the actual technical aspects aren't that hard. It's kind of like shooting the Milky Way, or anything at night, shooting the comet that's going by the Earth right now. That's it's no more difficult than that. But it was a challenge for me. I was just too excited.
Okay, so the final question is, can you give us a budget of what it would cost?
Oh boy. Well, that depends on a lot of things. Airfare is pretty reasonable. At least it was when we went. If there are less flights, it might be more expensive. We stayed in nice guest houses and hotels, and probably maybe $100, $125, maybe $150 a night. Food was kind of expensive. It wasn't unusual to spend. Some of the hotels had the only restaurant in town, or the guest houses had the only place you could eat, and it was pretty easy to spend $100 between the 2 of us for that. On the other hand, there are many places where you can rent a van or something the size of one of those Sprinter motorhomes or a Sprinter van if you want to go out and camp. There are lots of places to camp. If you like to camp and you're a little bit adventurous and you want to do it on the cheap, you could totally do it on the cheap. You could buy your food in grocery stores, not as cheap as the stores here, but a lot cheaper than eating in restaurants. Budget-wise, I think you could probably, I have no idea what the vans cost. You could, you can spend as little or as much as you want, I guess, but as I said, the airfare, I think we probably paid about $1,500 between the 2 of us. It was really cheap airfare. But the lodging, eating out, kind of expensive, but there's a way around that. We didn't take any tours that you pay for. There's lots of those if you want to. I mean, you could spend, I would say, $3,000 for a couple of weeks, or you could spend $15,000, or anywhere in between, depending upon how you like to travel and what your needs are. And, if you require a 4-star, they've got them. I don't know why you do want to do that, but the real attraction in Iceland is getting outside, not staying in a hotel room.
Yeah, your daughter said, "Hi, Dad, I did it for $1,500, which included van, airfare, and food."
Perfect. I'll bet I know who that was.
Yep.
Well, and that's the information I was hoping would come in.
Yes.
because we did not use a van. We seriously considered it, but they wouldn't let us rent a van after the end of September. And I think there's a chance Kathy and I would have done that because that's how we camp anyway. And it wouldn't have been that different. But as it turned out, we met some cool people in the guest houses and worked out fine for us.
Well, thank you. Thank you for all those wonderful questions. I'll pass it on to Stefna.
Geoffrey, that was a wonderful, wonderful program. Thank you so much for all your time and your effort. Your images are just stunning, and I really felt like I got away this evening for a little bit, and it's something that I think was really good for my soul, definitely. I needed something like that.
Can I add one thing?
Certainly.
This was the binder that they gave us. Is that backwards?
No, that looks good.
Can see it.
Nordic Visitor is the company. I researched a number of them. They have a wide range of trips. They'll take you or set you up for a week or a month or anything in between. They're extremely easy to deal with. I really, really liked them. And if you're planning a trip, you couldn't go too far wrong by hooking up with those folks.
Well, that's a great recommendation. You had a beautiful trip, and thank you so much.
Sure.
And thank you to everyone for joining us. I want to remind you that the Remarkable Journeys program, it's a program that happens every month. And next month, Geoffrey returns. He's going to come up with another program. It is Death Valley, the Highs and the Lows. And it's on Thursday, August 20th at 7 p.m. So we look forward to seeing you then. Thank you very much, and have a good evening.
Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you, Geoffrey.
Thank you, Geoffrey.